Marleen, welcome and thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for inviting me. It's an honor to be here.
So, I mean, what you've done at the Abbe Museum, I mean, I know it's not you, I know it's a whole team of people and a long process. I mean, it really is amazing. Just tell us in a nutshell, as we'd say in English, just give us a short summary of what it is that you've actually, how you have transformed the museum and what it is, what are the highlights, what is it you're most proud of?
Whoa. So the Abbe Museum is a museum for modern and contemporary art. And since 2014, we have been working together with all kinds of constituencies to make the museum as accessible as possible. And along the way, we transformed the museum into an inclusive museum. And for us, that means that accessibility is for us the foundation of becoming an inclusive museum, because without being accessible, you cannot be inclusive. That's what we are saying. And so that works. Our work evolves around making special programs for special groups, like people that are blind or partially sighted, people that are deaf, people with dementia, aphasia, people with Down syndrome. So all kinds of different groups towards a more transformation of the whole museum. So not only the programs, but also our exhibitions, our staff, the way we approach and work together with partners, the way we work together with our public. And we did that, over the last couple of years. So that's in a nutshell.
In a nutshell. So tell me a little bit about this. I mean, you said accessibility is the key to inclusion. That was the phrase that you used there. Yeah. I mean, I don't think any of us would disagree with that, but can we just probe that a little? How are you understanding accessibility in the context of what you've done at the museum?
Yeah. So I think museums are places of stories, and the stories we are telling, we tell with exhibitions or with objects. And if people don't have the ability to see or to understand or to experience these stories, we're not accessible, and we're not welcoming them to in our midst. So for us, accessibility is more than putting a ramp outside of our building to allow people in wheelchairs to come to visit our buildings, because it's also about accessibility of the stories that we are telling. So that means that you have to understand what the boundaries are that people experience to have full access to these stories. And that can be a language problem, but it can also be invisible boundaries, like do people understand what you're saying, or do we speak the same language, or can they even read and write, or can they see or hear the words that, for instance, the guide is telling us. So it's a multi-layered way of looking at accessibility, because when we first started out, accessibility was mostly about putting a ramp outside of your building. It's very like physical based approach of like changing the way the building looks, but it's more of a mentality than that it is a building problem.
Interesting. So that those barriers that you've described, I mean, the obvious ones, the visible ones, like the physical barriers, I mean, we have a lot of knowledge in terms of an understanding about that. But what I'm hearing you say there is that it was more the attitudinal and the cultural barriers. So how did you, I mean, thinking about your colleagues and the rest of the museum workforce, thinking about it internally now, did you meet resistance to the changes that you wanted to make, and how did you overcome that?
Well, I thought there would be a lot of resistance, especially when we started working with blind audiences. I thought the conservators would be not as pleased as I am that they would touch objects. but the resistance wasn't that bad, really, because in the end, we want the same thing. We want to unlock the stories that are behind all these different artworks. And if we have to put an extra effort to it, to make, for instance, touchable objects or touchable replicas, to make that happen, then it's much easier. But for what I think what really changed is when people started realizing that this is not something for a very small group, that is some sort of a nice thing to do for a small group of people. Because in the Netherlands alone, 25% of the population of the Netherlands have some sort of disability. And if you ask, for instance, in our staff, when I was doing the kickoff many years ago, I was asking them, like, okay, who of you know somebody who has problems reading or doesn't hear very well, or is in a wheelchair? And everybody knew somebody in their direct environment, like people from their families or people from the like friends. So I think this is not a problem. This is not a problem that we should solve for only those few people, but it's actually something that is for all of us.
So that kind of social model that you're outlining there, that notion of disability, working with access and disability benefits a broader group of people, benefits society, because the reduction in barriers is beneficial to everybody. And I think what I think is so fascinating about what you've just said is the power of narrative, the power of stories, which of course as museum and material culture people and people who work with books and libraries and so on, is our absolute core belief, isn't it? That's the power really that we have, and how you can use that to transform. So do you feel, I mean, generally, have you found that visitors, all your visitors are enjoying the different ways that you're offering interpretation and engagement within the museum now?
Yes, because I think the traditional approach to art is still there. Like you can still see artworks hanging on a wall, but for instance, at the exhibition that just opened, it's a multi-sensory exhibition that allows not only, for instance, blind audiences to touch or smell or hear the artworks or the compositions that were made specifically for the artworks, but it's also enriching the museum experience for every visitor. So I'm sure, I'm very positive. Also, when we talk to our visitors, we are over the last couple of years and talked about the changes that's been happening. I think everybody, yeah, of course, okay, almost everybody is super excited because, for instance, a white cube setting with only one artwork in a gallery space, I think that time has passed. Yeah. Because that's a very exclusive space in many different layers. It's not only exclusive for people with disabilities, but also exclusive because of the stories they represent. So the multi-layered way of storytelling with all these different constituencies and all these different approaches and layers, that doesn't work quite well in a white cube setting.
Yes, that's so interesting, isn't it? That sort of general understanding that contemporary art has a kind of added layer of exclusion in terms of the aesthetics and the vocabulary around it and so on. And I mean, I found it absolutely fascinating to watch your videos, which incidentally, you know, are really worth watching, everybody. There's a series of videos on YouTube that explain how the museum went about this particular approach. And the one that I particularly found fascinating was hearing the two young architects talking about their methodology. Could you just tell us a little bit about that? Because architects are notoriously difficult to persuade to work with access.
Yeah. I'm so happy that you picked that one out, because it was also for us I think, a very tipping point. Because first we were focusing on programs, so making already existing programs accessible, towards becoming a multi-sensory museum. And that's where we started working with 2 architects and the KU Leuven. And what they did is that they worked together with experience experts, people with disabilities, in the whole design process. So, and the central question for us was, how would the museum look like if it was developed from all senses, and what can we learn from people with disabilities in understanding spaces? And by working together with them, we figured out that there's a lot of visible but also invisible boundaries that they come across, what makes museums particularly inaccessible. For instance, people are very quiet in museums, and that's because the sound, the echo, is always terrible in most of the museums. Also in our museum, it was terrible. So that has a huge impact for people that are hard of hearing, because it just costs too much effort to be in that space and to understand each other. So, for instance, so that's just one of the small things that led to redesigning one floor in the museum, and it was also a stepping stone in transforming the whole museum, like 5 floors in the museum now that we just opened, where we changed, I think a lot of things to make it more accessible for everybody.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I really recommend those videos. We can drop the links into the chat during the course. They are really, really fantastically interesting and very informative, very enlightening. I mean, what's next? Where do you go from here? I mean, what's next for you?
I think we relinking, delinking, relinking is a new exhibition presentation. We worked on that presentation for almost 2 years. And why I'm telling you this is because it's because it's really important for us where we want to take the next step. I think what we did is we start working from the very beginning with different focus groups, for instance, Office of Queer Affairs, for instance, but especially the group, My Dream Team, I must say, I worked a lot with them. They were art professionals with disabilities, and they advised us from the very beginning of the process on the concept of what is the story that we want to tell, what artworks are we going to use to tell the story, but especially how are we going to design the exhibition to make sure it's inclusive for everybody, it's accessible for everybody. And that whole process in working together really changed the way we worked internally. Because you can imagine, if you invite other people in from the outside, you cannot do what you do already for 25 years. You have to change your structure in your way of working. And I think we did a great job, but we failed along the way, of course, a lot of times. Of course. Because it's just reshaping and redesigning the whole design process. And I think everyone involved, it was a very challenging process. And I think we try to do justice to this collaboration, and I think we learned a lot along the way. And I think that leaves us for every next step to work to sharpen that process even more, and to find a way to make sure that, for instance, accessibility and also all the design brief we made together, that it's being honored also in the last phase, not only in the beginning, but also in the last phase. And that's, it's a very technical part, but it's just people, if people are working, everybody have their own role in a process. And inclusion is also about opening up and welcoming other people in your role to work together. And that's something that you cannot achieve with one project or 1 year. It takes just a little bit more time.
Marleen, thank you so much. I think this has been such a wonder. We could talk all day, and I'd love to know more about it. What I particularly love is how you have explained to us that inclusion is something that happens to us internally as well as happening in the way that we work. So it is a process of change. And I think your humility is very inspiring, actually. And you said we've made mistakes and we've learned, but that's the point, isn't it? Learning and going forward and working in partnership. I think that's where those real shifts of power can take place. Huge congratulations. We didn't even get around to talking about your robot, but that's a little taster for everybody to go and have a look at the robot, which is quite amazing, I have to say. And well, I for one will be making a special trip to come and see you just as soon as I can. Thank you so much for starting us off this morning, and very, very many congratulations on a wonderful project. Thank you, Marleen.